Hey guys, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and this time I've got a sneak peek at an upcoming Tier 8 American premium heavy tank, the T26E5. It's kind of a hybrid between a Super Pershing or a Ripper pattern and also the T32. And also, I have no idea whether they're going to be putting in this very patriotic skin into the game for it as well. Anyway, more to come after we have a rundown of all of the statistics of this vehicle and my opinion of whether it's something to look out for. So here is the T26E5, and using Tank Inspector we can take a look at the game files to be able to, I guess, data mine the statistics of the vehicle. And to allow easier comparison, I have written them up all into an Excel file. So firstly, let's take a look at the tank and also the mobility of the vehicle. We have on the left-hand column the T26E5, the tank in question. Then we have the T26E4, which is also known as the Super Pershing, the Tier 8 American Premium Medium Tank, which also has preferential matchmaking, I should add, as well as the T32, the Standard American Tier 8 Heavy Tank, the T34, the Premium American Heavy Tank, well, currently the only Premium American Heavy Tank at Tier 8, and that's soon going to have also the T26E5 to compete with it, and also the non-preferential matchmaking Ripper pattern. So firstly, we see that the T26E5 has the same hit points as the T26E4, and the T34 slightly more than the Ripper pattern, but slightly less than the T32. But one of the best things about this tank is its engine power. Unlike the Super Pershing, this vehicle has a 704 horsepower engine, which gives it a very respectable power to weight ratio of over 15.5, and that's because the vehicle actually weighs less than the Super Pershing, significantly less than the T32, and it loses a hell of a lot of weight compared to the T34, weighing just a little bit more than the Ripper pattern. And so this means that the vehicle has pretty much an extra 1.5 horsepower per ton over the T32 and 3 horsepower per ton over the T34. And while it's certainly not going to have quite as much grunt in the engine as the Ripper pattern, look how much more it has than the Super Pershing. We're talking about an increase of half for its specific power ratio, making the T26E5 certainly a rather fast heavy tank, especially when we take a look at the ground resistances of the vehicle. It's the same as the Super Pershing, meaning that this thing is pretty much just going to be 50% at least better acceleration. And not only is the specific power better on the T26E5 than the T34, but its ground resistances are also better as well, significantly better on soft, as we can see here. And so this means the T26E5 is probably going to be the fastest Tier 8 American heavy tank, a little bit faster than the T32, especially on medium and soft terrain, and way faster than the T34. Now also, the top speed limit of the tank is rather nice as well, 40 kilometers an hour forwards. That's better than the T32 and the T34, although it does lag behind the Ripper pattern, so it's not going to have medium tank mobility. It's got the same top speed limit as the Super Pershing. Unfortunately, backwards, its top speed limit is a little worse than the Super Pershing at 15 rather than 18, but as we can see, its backwards top speed limit is better than the T32 and the T34, which should be very nice indeed to stop your opponents from flanking you. And there's more good news when we look at the traverse speed of the tank. 30 degrees a second is better than the T32 and the T34. Only slightly behind the Super Pershing, but quite a bit worse than the Ripper pattern, as you would expect, because that is a true medium tank. And there's more good news when we look at the turret traverse. 26 degrees a second is better than the Super Pershing, just a touch better than the T32, way better than the T34, but significantly worse than the Ripper pattern, as you would expect, with it being that pure medium class. And so now on to the firepower of the T26E5. It has a 90mm just like the Super Pershing and the Ripper pattern, but doesn't have that big clout like the T32 has with its 105mm and the 120mm that the T34 gets. And so this results in the 240 average damage per shot, which is actually rather low for a Tier 8 tank, sort of in the region of the Carnarvon when we think about it, behind the 320 of the 105mm on the T32 and the 400 of the 120mm on the T34. One thing that's amazing about this 90mm gun though is that it gets awesome penetration on its standard rounds, 230mm of penetration. That's more than enough to handle pretty much everything until you start to get to some very heavily armored Tier 9 and Tier 10 heavy tanks, which is 60mm better than the Super Pershing. But we must also add that remember that this vehicle gets preferential matchmaking, unlike the T26E5, which will have to deal with Tier 10 tanks. Now that 230mm is just so much better than the T32, 32mm better, only slightly worse than the monstrous penetration that the T34 gets, well, 18mm less. And the penetration again is way better than the Ripper pattern, which remember, doesn't have preferential matchmaking, and really does struggle when it comes to being able to penetrate tier 10 tanks, especially with 243mm of penetration on its premium rounds, unlike the 259 that the T26E5 gets. One thing that's also very interesting about the T26E5 is that, as we can see here, its standard rounds are APCR, which should suggest that it gets excellent shell velocity, right? But as we can see here, its shell velocity is 1021 meters per second, which unfortunately isn't really that much better than the standard rounds, as we can see here on the Super Pershing, the T32, the T34, or the Ripper pattern. And when we check the vehicle's premium rounds, we can also see that they have the same 1021 meters a second shell velocity, which is actually way worse than the premium rounds, as we can see here on the T32, which have got 1181 meters a second shell velocity. But still, having that 50 to pretty much 200 meters a second better shell velocity on your standard rounds should be rather nice with the T26E5. And if you're a player that just refuses to fire premium rounds, then they don't really provide that much extra benefit in the T26E5. Next up, one thing that is amazing about this tank is the rate of fire, which currently is 8.69 rounds a minute. That is absolutely incredible when we compare it to the Super Pershing, which fires 7.32 rounds a minute, or the Ripper pattern, which fires 7.41 rounds a minute. And in fact, when we take a look at some of the other best tier 8 premium tanks with 90mm with regards to rate of fire, we can see that the CDC has got a worse rate of fire than the T26E5 at 8.22. The 59 pattern fires 8 rounds a minute, much like the STA2 does now. And only the Panther 88, which fires 8.7 rounds a minute, has a better DPM, or shall we say, almost joint equal DPM to the T26E5, which is absolutely crazy when we think about it, because look at all of the other DPMs of these tier 8 American tanks. The vehicle has 485 DPM advantage over the T34, which is dramatic. That's pretty much 30%. And I'm a little bit baffled. Honestly, I would think that this vehicle was going to fire about 7 rounds a minute, so it had worse DPM than the medium tanks, more in line with the T34, but that's simply not the case. It's pretty much got AAA DPM for a tier 8 premium, medium or heavy tank. So how about the accuracy? Well, 0.38, it's not disastrous like the T32, for example, but it's certainly not as good as the T34, and it's an unwelcome 0.38 that you sometimes get on your American tanks with their higher DPM. But thankfully, the aim time is great, 2.3 seconds, the same as the Super Pershing and the T32, way better than the T34's 3.4 seconds aim time, which is horrific, and even better aim time than the Ripper pattern, as we can see here. The dispersion values as well, while moving, are 0.2, which is 0.04 better than the Super Pershing, or should we say 20% better, and it's 0.01 better while moving than the T32, and way, way, way better than the T34, which means that you should be able to aim quickly to be able to pull off snapshots, unlike the other tier 8 premium American heavy tank can. But I should also mention that while the Ripper pattern does get that horrific 2.5 seconds aim time, it does get amazing dispersion while moving, meaning that you can pretty much fire at max accuracy immediately after stopping, or even while still moving. And how about the turret traverse dispersion? Well, it's 0.13, which is way better than the Super Pershing, just a little bit better than the T32, massively better than the horrific turret dispersion that the T34 gets, and a bit worse than the Ripper pattern's amazing 0.08. The vehicle also gets very American gun depression at 10 degrees like all of these tanks, and 20 degrees of gun elevation. And in addition, unlike the Super Pershing, this vehicle is pretty much never going to run out of ammo, because you've got 70 rounds of 90mm ammunition, which can do over 16,000 average damage if you penetrate all of your shells. And furthermore, the vehicle has also got pretty nice view range, 390 meters, the same as the tier 8 premium American medium tanks in this comparison, and 30 meters better than the T34, but just a touch worse than the T32, which, am I mistaken in thinking that that's pretty much the first thing that the T32 has had over the T26E5 with regards to an advantage? But all of that might be about to change when we take a look at the armor of this tank. Here is the armor layout of the T26E5. It has 152mm on the front of the hull, 76 on the side, and 50 at the rear. And it has 190 on the front of the turret, 101 at the side of the turret, and 127 at the rear of the turret. Now, all of these values are way better than the Super Pershing and the Ripper pattern, but we should also take into account that that spaced armor riot shield that the Super Pershing gets is not being included. But we can see that the hull armor on this tank is 152, way thicker than the T32 and the T34 frontally. But let's take a look in Tank Inspector to see what kind of an effective armor we can get from this. So the hull armor of the T26E5 is just absolutely incredible. I can't believe it's so good. It's got 200 millimeters of all-round effective upper plate armor even when you're not angling the tank. When you angle the tank, pretty much like this, which should still make the side armor a ricochet, as we can see along here. Then you've got like 215 millimeters of effective hull armor on the top. And that's not when you're using the gun depression. And remember, with 10 degrees, I can't quite aim all the way down with Tank Inspector, but immediately we can see we're up to about 230, 245 here along the whole of the upper part of the hull. This is going to be a serious tank. With regards to its frontal armor capabilities, and take a look at the lower plate of this tank as well, 190 all the way along the bottom, and with some side bits here as well to protect it, 190. This vehicle doesn't really need to armor to still be able to ricochet pretty much every single tier 6 tank that's going to be shooting at it. Most tier 7s, and really it's only tier 8 and above that is going to be able to challenge this thing frontally unless they're firing premium rounds. What about the machine gun port on the front? Is that going to be a weakness? No, it's actually 203 millimeters of effective armor, as we can see on the flatter parts here. They obviously don't want to give this thing a weak point like you would have on the T29, for example, making this thing pretty frankly rather crazy with regards to its hull armor. Let's take a look at the turret and see what we're getting here. 281, 300, 400, ricochet this, ricochet that. What about the cupola? Are you going to be able to hit the cupola without using gun depression? Yeah, 250. What? You're kidding me, right? No, 190 in parts? Wow, you're going to need some serious penetration to be able to get through that cupola, a lot like on a T32, and if the tank's using its gun depression like this, you are not hitting that. What about the cheeks of the tank? Okay, so there are some areas around about here that you might be able to hit for about 200, but for the most part, it's 250 to a ricochet. Has this thing got pretty much the same turret as the T32? It definitely has a unique turret, it's the T26E5 turret. But really, this tank's turret is an absolute beast. I can't believe it. This thing, you're pretty much going to be able to just sit here unless I'm missing something, and hardly any of the enemy team are going to be able to penetrate you in the turret. Of course, you T32 lovers out there shouldn't really worry too much, because as we can see, the T32's turret is still by far the best. The whole of the upper part here will be a ricochet. You're going to need 300 millimeters to 400 millimeters to be able to get through the T32, and all across the front, 300 millimeters of penetration as well. So T32 drivers, don't worry, even the side of the turret, as we can see here on the T32, is way better. Oh wow, look at that side turret. Even when angling like this, they still need about 250 to 300 millimeters of penetration to be able to get through. Whereas if you angle your side turret like this, when you're driving in the T26E5, it is significantly weaker all along this part. 200 millimeters, and when you angle a little bit more like this, then it's down to 160 and 135. Whereas on the T32 angled like this, you've got 300 to 200 millimeters of protection. But frontally at least, that's still an awesome turret on the T26E5, like up to 280 compared to the 300 that the T32 has. That is a very strong turret, and so to be able to kill one of these tanks, you're pretty much going to have to get its side armor, where suddenly the vehicle becomes very easy to take out. And unlike a T32, nail this thing in the side of the turret and you should be alright. And while we're at it, let's take a look at the turret armor of the Super Pershing. So all over the front of the shield here, we can see it's 300, so you're not really getting through that. And it's only really if you can see the top of the cupola of the tank, which you only need about 160 to 200 millimeters to be able to get through, that the Super Pershing has a weakness. So how about the hull armor of the Super Pershing? Well, the hull armor of the Super Pershing, if they can't shoot through this little gap in the spaced armor and hit the machine gun here, is actually significantly better. You're not really going through the lower plate unless you have a hell of a lot of penetration. Going through the upper plate as well is challenging at 250. And so the Super Pershing definitely has an advantage with regards to the riot shield that it has over the front of the gun and also over the front of the hull, but it's just very annoying to have those two weak points here and obviously here on top of the cupola that you just don't have. You just don't have those weaknesses with the T26E5, although your armor is just a little bit thinner, but still on the turret enough to deal with pretty much everything. I'd be happy even with up to tier 10 tank destroyers shooting me in the turret in the T26E5. And so I think that's quite enough theory crafting. Let's see how this vehicle performs in some gameplay. So here we go, and I'm playing in the T44-100. Oh wait, that's not what this video is about. And unfortunately, I wasn't playing the T26E5. I managed to spot one completely out of the blue on the European server. Here is the T26E5, which is being played by Balance EU. Do you know what's really annoying about these accounts as well? Is that you can't inspect them and see the statistics of the vehicle. Now, I would really love that if we were able to have a sneak peek as to how some of the players who are being able to test these tanks for wargaming, I guess, have been doing in them. So the T26E5 is pushing right down the center, and he's going to have a swing at the ELC-AMX. He shoots him on the move, and then he just decides to let him be. And that's because I guess he's depending on me to finish off the ELC-AMX. There we go. Now he's going to be shooting at a T44-100. He's not quite able to hit him, and so he decides to pull back. Now, of course, if you're playing on Sand River, by far the best place to go on this map if you're in a medium tank, and you know what, this vehicle kind of has the mobility of a medium tank, so why not use it, is to go and hit the ridge. If you hit this ridge up here, you can get lovely shots all the way down here. You can get some spots all the way around here, and so I think that's exactly what our friend is going to do. Now, I should just really talk about the skins of the T26E5, because what you're seeing here is the standard version of the T26E5, but there is also going to be a funky paint job that you can have, I believe, on the T26E5 Patriot Edition. But let's see if this guy's going to be able to pull off some shots. Will he hit the Super Pershing? Sorry, not the Super Pershing, the SP1C even. Oh, you can tell I've been comparing the Super Pershing in my mind. No, I managed to hit the SP1C, but this guy misses twice. Ouch! So where did that shell actually hit? Looks like that shell must have gone right underneath his tank, or alternatively splashed and hit his his right-hand side armor. And he lost a lot of hit points there. He lost pretty much 800 hit points, just shy of 800 hit points there. Half of his hit points, I believe, to one of the Tier 8 self-propelled guns on the enemy team. That certainly is one of the risks of using this position. Unfortunately, the balance tester was unable to hit the SP1C there. But, you know, with 10 degrees of gun depression, you should be able to work that ridge. So, I'm basically trying to spot out here across the west to stop the enemies from coming in. And it looks like the balance tester is, again, making use of that 10 degrees to go and see if you can get a shot into the T44-100. Unable to hit him, though. We really want to get rid of this SP1C right now. If we manage to get rid of that SP1C, then we can take the vision away from the enemy team. And yeah, he puts a round in, good, 222 damage done there. And I guess, is that going to be one of the turn-offs for this tank for you guys? Are you not going to pick this up purely because it's a heavy tank that has a 90mm gun? And you don't really want to be using 240 alpha damage on your heavies, and you're so accustomed to having kind of like 320 like the T32, or preferably having 400 average damage like the T34. I'm not sure. But then again, I guess this thing, if it was really slow, I wouldn't be too keen on it, I don't think. I would wonder if the 200mm of all-round hull armor and the, I guess, 250 to 350mm of frontal turret armor were enough to justify the fact that you didn't have, shall we say, AAA medium tank mobility, unlike you would get on the Super Pershing, or unlike you would get on the, for example, the T54 Mod 1, or even like you would get on the Ripper pattern. It's only tanks like the CDC, maybe the Mutz, and other vehicles at Tier 8 Premium Medium that do have that kind of mobility, and I think it's definitely a trade-off. So it looks like my friend here managed to put, well, not my friend, I don't know him, why am I calling him my friend? Manages to put a round into the T29 there, but I finish him off. So he's advancing, he's going to be able to put some hits in, and I have to admit, right now I get rather excited. I think that we've got this game completely, and so I want to advance and try and help out the T26E5 here, and then this T25-2 gets above me, and he is going to make my life a living hell. As we can see there, we take 216 damage, but let's take a look to see if the T26E5 is managing to put any shots in. Doesn't look like it, considering the T25-2 is at 100% of his hit points, and remember this .38 accuracy not doing the T26E5 very well. As he manages, but he does manage to put one into the T25-2, and now he turns his attention to the CDCs, who are just killing me there. So the CDCs managed to take me out, so finally this guy gets a chance to use the DPM of this tank. He's reversing, he bounces a shell from the CDC, and unfortunately that T25-2 continues to nail him in the side. And this is the awkward situation for this tank. If you are getting nailed in the side, then you can't really control the engagement. You can't keep your frontal armor to your opponents, and you are certainly going to struggle. And that T25-2 has just put 3 rounds in a row in, and that allowed the CDC to flank up and get his side armor. So as we can see, the T26E5, it's rock solid if you can keep your front to your opponents, but as soon as you give them the side, like we did for that T25-2, then you certainly are going to struggle. And then the CDC able to use his gun depression, his mobility, to be able to get around into the side of the tank up here. You absolutely, utterly have to be able to keep your frontal armor to your opponents if you want the T26E5 to work. But nevertheless, this game was a win in the end, that T26E5 getting taken out by the Hummel. We take it down. I'm sorry that I wasn't able to show any crazy gameplay this battle, but again, this is one of those sneak peek videos where it was just absolutely fortunate that I managed to get into a round with this tank to be able to showcase a little bit of the capabilities and more about the look of the tank. And talking about the look of the tank, do you guys want to see the Patriot paint job that this tank has? So this vehicle literally just went into the client today. We can see "We the People" on the gun barrel there, isn't that from the Constitution? Got some eagles on the side of the turret, even got the stars on top of the vehicle in a red and white paint job. I don't know what you guys think. Do you think this is going to look a little silly in World of Tanks? This is only the kind of thing that we've been seeing on the console version of the game. Or do you think it's just a bit of fun? I have no idea whether we're going to be seeing this only on the American server, or if we're going to perhaps see a non-Patriot version on the European server. I think that might be what's going to happen, but I think that Wargaming are trying to look for our feedback to be able to see what they really want to produce. I don't know, I'm not sure if we want to be seeing paint jobs like this, but then again, we have seen the Mutz in the game this year, right, with the bear on the side of the tank. We've also seen recently the Scorpion, with a scorpion over pretty much the front of the tank, I think. But I think you have to admit that this is really taking it to a whole new level. And let me know in the comments down below what you guys think, if it's too much and you don't want to see this. And in fact, I'll put a poll up in the top right-hand corner of your screen where you can vote whether you would like to see a paint job like this in the game or not. And remember, the question that I'm asking you is not whether you want to see this tank in the game or not, because Wargaming could easily just put the non-crazy paint job in, just like this, like we saw in the gameplay. But do you think that it's right for Wargaming to put in the Patriot paint job into World of Tanks on the PC version? Remember that things like this have already been done on the console. And oh my word, I just wanted to show you the post-game stats and upload it onto What Replays, but it doesn't look like I'm actually allowed to upload this replay, probably because it has one of the test tanks in it. How absolutely bizarre! This is my replay of my game just because somebody's testing a tank in it, and they're preventing me from uploading it on What Replays? That's pretty crazy. Oh well, we have other ways of seeing how the battle went, looking at What Replays Manager. So I managed to pick up 1,430 damage. The T26E5 just pipped me 1,513 damage. And unfortunately, we're not going to be able to see the economics of the vehicle, i.e. how many credits he made, and that's something that we're going to have to wait for when I do my full review of this tank. So all in all, I think the T26E5 looks to be one of the strongest Tier 8 premium tanks that Wargaming has ever released in the game, which seems to be a bit of a pattern after the Scorpion. Maybe Wargaming are deciding that they just want to make them as strong as vehicles at the tier, irrelevant of them being premium or not, as long as I guess they're not performing better than the standard vehicles. And I think the T26E5 is starting to push the boundaries of whether this is actually better than the T32. Of course, the T32's got that godlike armor, but at least in my opinion, I would far rather play this than play in the T34. Not only do you have significantly better hull armor, and I would say at least comparable turret armor, better view range, better gun handling, just everything feels a little bit better about the tank, apart from obviously the alpha damage and the penetration, but you have a 25 to 30% DPM advantage over the T34. This thing truly looks like it might be dispensing freedom. And I just can't wait to test it for you guys and then be able to give you my full opinion, so definitely stay tuned to the channel for that. But hopefully this video was enjoyable, or maybe just useful. If it was, please consider giving it a like, it really helps the channel out. And make sure you vote up in the poll whether you think a paint job like this will fit in World of Tanks, and it's something you want to see. And remember that this is going to be kind of setting a precedence. And if Wargaming see that things like this are well received, then it's very likely that we're going to be seeing more tanks just like this. And if we don't like it, it's very important that we tell them now. And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.